Higher capacity mounts for visual observing on episode 296 of the Actual Astronomy Podcast. I'm Chris, and joining me is Shane. We're amateur astronomers who love looking up the sky. And today we are asking, what are the best mounts for Shane and I to upgrade to? So, yeah, kind of an exciting one. Before we get going, did you get any observing in, Shane? Have you been able to get out and take a look at the comet or take a look at anything for that matter?
Oh, nope. It's been cloudy, and we had a brief moment, or I guess a brief opportunity, maybe Friday night, Saturday morning type of thing. But I had some water issues in my basement related to a water heater Wednesday night that caused little sleep, and I was just out of energy by the end of the week. So I didn't even make an attempt to look at this comet. I needed sleep more than I needed comets. So that was my story. How about you? Were you able to get out and take a look at it?
No, I got up I got up a few nights, but the only night that was reasonably clear was, I think, Saturday morning. And I'm still getting over this throat infection that I've had. And it wasn't that clear. Like, it wasn't clear enough. There was some clouds kicking around. I could see the clouds are moving in. And I would have to go and drive like 15 minutes to get to my dark spot. And I thought, I'm going to pack that telescope. It's going to take me 15 minutes, and it's going to take me 15 minutes to drive there. And then I thought, I think it's like 50-50 whether it would even be clear in that area of the sky. So I said, forget it. I'm going back to bed. Actually, we'll get into this in a second. I didn't go back to bed. I ended up looking at mounts on mine. But I, when I did eventually go back to bed and get up in the morning, I could see the clouds were just moving off, and it was a big cloud deck. So I'm like 90% sure it did totally cloud up.
Well, it's funny. I did wake up from my sleep at about 4:30 or 5, and I thought, well, if I'm not sleeping, maybe I should go try for this comet. But I grabbed my tablet, looked at the the cloud satellite imagery, and it looked questionable. So I thought, well, I need sleep. This is questionable. Forget it. I'm not even going to try.
Yeah, and like Mike got up and he was trying to look, like he was saying in the last recorded. He couldn't get it, and he was in the city. So there's a lot of lights around in the city, of course. But I'm on the edge of the city, and I could just see the clouds. And sometimes it's like that, where like you have like the high Cirrus and other clouds kicking around. When you're right in the core of the city, it seems like it's clear, and then like out at my place, I could just kind of see them. And then again, when I woke up in the morning and there was some light coming through, even though it was still reasonably dark, there were some significant clouds that were actually kicking around eventually. So I think he got out just after the clouds had passed, and it was just starting to get bright. So yeah, I put a little nice little image in there. It says this is sort of just kind of fun because we've had some terrible conditions here, Shane and I, and Mike and everybody else that's living in our neck of the woods. It's actually been better around us. I've had messages from people in Manitoba, which is to our east. I've had messages from people in Alberta, which is to our west. I think I even had messages from people to our south in like Montana and stuff. And they've had some clear nights. It has been amazing, but they've had some clear nights, and other than like a really marginal morning, we've had nothing. So I put this little image in our show notes. I got it from the one of the Facebook groups, and it says I'll set up my telescope tonight, and then it has clouds : and then has a picture of like somebody's nice house, and peeking in between the dormer or whatever is like this cloud with sort of this sinister, crazy smiley face that's just poking up over top. And that's kind of what it's been like in fact, I would give anything for a sky that's even that good. So
yeah, me too. We've had some daytime clearness, but evenings just have not really cooperated at all. And a big part of it is we've just been unusually humid. Like our winters are typically quite dry, but the last 3 weeks, maybe even longer, just like high humidity every night, probably in that like 90% range. And as such, we have a lot of very pretty frost on any outdoor object. But again, it just is not conducive to astronomical observing at night.
Yeah. So instead, we'll kind of wander into our topic now. Instead of going observing that morning, I was online, and I was looking at some used mounts, and kind of been thinking about a few things. So for me, I'm kind of looking, we'll get into like our current situations here. I'm kind of looking for a larger, more solid mount, because my current situation is such that I just have 3 really good grab and go Altaz mounts. I have a 1 pound Dwarf Star, which is like a pocket mount. And then I've got my AZ8, and then the Takahashi Lapidus.
Yeah.
Shane, what's your current situation? What mounts do you currently have?
So somewhat similar. Like I've got a number of grab and go mounts. So if I start with my smallest, I have that Burlaback Caster 2, which is a T mount. It can mount 2 telescopes, and I love that one. It can actually handle my 76 millimeter tack quite well without any issue. It really is a great mount. I have an older Stellarvue M1 mount. It's the one with the big silver knobs for the Alt-Az friction control. Moving up in the world in terms of capacity, I have an M2C, which is a more modern Stellarvue mount, but it's really just the big brother of the M1. They have the exact same design, just a much larger bearing and overall form factor for the M2C. I have a SkyT 2 mount, which again is a T mount. But this one is much heavier capacity. It can haul a lot more gear or heavier gear on it, and has slow motion controls. I don't use that one as much, but I really do like it. It's a great mount. And then probably my last one that I'll really talk about is I do have a Lazmany made for Celestron, and it's called a G9. And if anybody's familiar with the Lazmany EQ mounts, which this is, a G9 doesn't make a lot of sense. It's either like there's a G8 or GM8, and then it goes up to an 11, I believe. And I can't remember what time period this was, but Celestron contracted Lazmany to make a mount for their 9.25-inch Schmidt Cassegrain. And this is the mount that Lazmany produced. And it was like the bearing inside of it is larger than the GM8, but smaller than the 11. So some people have just sort of affectionately called it the GM9. I do have a couple other mounts that, my Tasco 10TE, like my vintage telescopes, those ones came with their own sort of made for EQ mounts, but I really don't repurpose those for anything else. And then I have that Takahashi TS65 that came with an EQ mount as well.
Wow.
Oh, you know what? There's one more, Chris. Sorry. I bought this one last year used, and I really haven't used it, which is why I didn't think of it, but I have a go-to mount. It's a Celestron, the 8SE. So they package their 8-inch Cassegrain with this mount. It's a single arm fork, single arm fork, I think is how you'd call it. Anyway, I've used one in the past. I've owned one in the past, actually, and they're fantastic. It's a nice little mount that, I kind of like to use those for solar observing. I can just have it track the sun all day. I have the little Wi-Fi adapter for it, so I can connect my phone to it and then use Sky Safari for it to find objects. And it's a great little mount. It doesn't have huge capacity, but for backyard observing, with my smaller refractors, it's wonderful.
Nice. So you've got a lot of mounts.
Too many. Yep.
Too many. Never. So what are your needs that aren't being met now with these mounts? And maybe what do you see coming up that might require a different mount in the near future or in the future at some point?
Yeah. So if I ignore the Lazmany mount, because that one does have great capacity, but it's a big, heavy mount. It requires counterweights that are heavy, and it's an EQ mount. And I don't use EQ mounts enough to find them intuitive when I'm trying to find things in the sky. And I know, it really is just about usage, because I've watched Mike, who, we just recorded with, when Mike uses his Polaris mount, which is an EQ, he is so efficient with it and so capable. And it just, it's because he's used it a lot. So anyway, I'm excluding the Lazmany because it has a high capacity. All my other alt-az mounts, I would say, are like medium capacity at best. And I'm starting to think about a larger refractor at some point in my future, likely a 6-inch. And I don't think that my existing alt-az mounts would be sufficient. I think the SkyT 2 and maybe the M2C could mount a 6-inch refractor. I'm just not sure it would be the most stable platform. So I'm starting to look at what are the alternatives out there, and what would the cost of those be.
Yeah, I was just looking at the G9 here. I guess it's like the predecessor to the modern Lazmany G8. And yeah, I'm not sure what the capacity is, though. It must be like close to 30 pounds or something.
Yeah, I would say probably in that range. Certainly, at least 30, I would say, would be a maximum. It's quite capable.
Nice. So for me, I'm kind of looking at something maybe I would, I'm slowly maybe working towards an observatory, or at the least anyway, I now have a more permanent spot, like at my dark sky site. I can kind of set up, within, right in front of where I sit and record many of these podcasts. And so my mount just kind of sits there right in front of me. So it's very secure, and it's a pretty secure place anyway. I know all the people who live around me, nobody's looking for a telescope mount. And, I'm able to set up for days on end. So before, one of my highest priorities was mounts that were reasonably portable, because I was just taking that in amongst many other pieces of gear. But now I find, I get concerned, like they're not really big and hefty mounts. So I get concerned if I leave them up and there's like a big wind coming or anything like that, I'd be pretty concerned if they fell over. And they're really not meant, none of these mounts that I have currently are meant to have telescopes sitting on them for days on end. They're meant to have a telescope put on them and observe with them, and then sort of taken off. They're not meant to sit out outside for under cover for days and days and days. They're just not designed for that level of use. So at the very least, I want to get something that's a little bit large and maybe a little bit more durable than what I have. And then, that then opens up the doors to maybe getting some other instruments like you were mentioning, Shane.
Yeah. And there's a lot to choose from. And the other side of it is some of these, and actually many of these options are also not inexpensive. So you definitely want to get it right the first time. So you're not disappointed, with the investment.
Yeah. So some of the stuff I've been looking at are like nothing too wild, but like maybe a 6-inch f5 refractor. I've always kind of wanted one of those. Sometimes you see them come up for even like a few $100s, like just like an inexpensive one. Maybe something like an 8 or a 10-inch Newtonian. Mm-hmm. Or maybe something like a 9 1/4 or an 11-inch Schmidt Cassegrain. Nothing too wild or strange, but just some different types of telescopes. And the one thing that I've been kind of thinking about is like your SkyT, but maybe we'll get into that here in a second. Just first, kind of want to give a bit of a shout out to Mark Radici of the Refreshing Views YouTube channel. He actually I was writing this yesterday. I wrote up this episode earlier in the day, and then Mark actually sent me an email on a slightly different topic. But anyway, Mark Radici has been on the show a few times, has a YouTube channel called Refreshing Views. And he really got me to thinking about observatories and how your mount is going to match the observatory. So Shane, I don't know if you remember when Mark was on, he was talking about having an 8x10 observatory.
Yes. Yep.
And originally he bought or had, I think he had a 14-inch Dobsonian. And what Mark found though was that the Dobsonian didn't work that good in the roll-off, even though he kind of sort of had the roll-off made with drop-down walls in that. And so we switched to an equatorial, and And eventually he had one scope in there on the equatorial, then he got an 11-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain grain, and eventually he's upgraded to SkyWatcher. I think it's the EQ6, or might have some of the characters backwards. And he's mounting his 11-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain grain and a 90mm refractor, which he just kind of would keep portably mounted in the corner of his observatory and kind of move it around, take it outside and that. So he's got both these main telescopes all set up, in that style. And I really like that. I had sort of been thinking about it myself, just as like, sort of daydreaming about what would be a neat setup for a smaller observatory. And then Mark went and did it. And he's made some videos on it, and it's just such a nice setup to have that 11-inch aperture and then the 90mm wide field. Of course, I have all kinds of small wide field scopes, but I would like to have something that's a little bit, larger in aperture. And I was like, oh, that would be ideal. But unfortunately for me right now, getting one of the AZ EQ6s, I think they're going to run like $300 or $3,500 Canadian. So I would be choosing whether or not I would ever build an observatory or have that mount. So I don't think I can do both of those at this time, Shane.
Yeah. And some of this, some of this is a journey for sure. I think when you're building an observatory and then outfitting it with the right gear, because there is a lot of cost associated with this stuff. So it's a matter, I think, of pacing it out so that you can end up with the solution you won't, just the solution that you'll really enjoy.
And then kind of going back in the summer, like I subscribe to Sky and Telescope magazine and get Sky News magazine, which is the astronomy magazine here in Canada. And they had some of these harmonic mounts, and I was looking at those, and I recognized they had some pretty decent capacities in a small package, and the prices didn't seem too bad, but they can't be manually operated. So, but anyway, they kind of got me thinking to what I would want to have, what could work in an observatory. So maybe what we'll do first, Shane, is we'll go over the different types of mounts that are just simply available out there. So maybe I'll just kind of call it a mount type, and you can kind of explain it to us with that.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Let's do that.
So the first mount is an equatorial mount. So what is an equatorial, or sometimes called just an EQ or a GEM or German equatorial mount? What is an equatorial mount, Shane?
Well, I think if people, again, have that quintessential image of a telescope in their mind, or what they're used to seeing on in a picture, there's a good chance it's on an EQ mount, because a lot of like department store telescopes will come on an EQ mount. Now, an EQ mount, to use it effectively, you have to align it, and you have to align it to Polaris, the North Star. And then essentially the way an EQ mount works is when you find your object, in order to track it, you only have to adjust one of the axes, and you'll be able to track that object across the sky. So if you are an astrophotographer, generally EQ mounts are greatly preferred over any other kind of mount, just because there's less opportunity for error, because you're only having to rotate on the one axis. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Chris?
No, I think that's good. Like you said, just that classic example with the big counterweight and the shaft, and then telescope sitting on top. It's just a lot of time what people have in mind. The other main types, there's like these two main types. There's the equatorial, then there's the alt-az, or the altitude and azimuth. Like the Dobsonian was sort of, in a way, like the original design many of us have in mind, but there's been a lot of other alt-az type mounts. So what is the altitude and azimuth or alt-az mount, Shane? Maybe we can just explain that really basically.
Yeah, these ones are pretty easy to explain. In terms of use, it's up, down, left, right. And it doesn't get any more basic than that. There are some alt-az mounts that are powered, with motors that either track or have go-to capabilities. But there's also a lot of alt-az mounts, like the ones you and I use, Chris, that are just push-tos. There's no motors, there's no electronics. They just hold the telescope. There's usually some friction adjustments on them so that you can kind of tune each axis for the gear that you have on there. And away you go. Maybe the one thing I'll say, in terms of other differences between an EQ and an alt-az, typically EQ mounts have a greater capacity, like a carrying capacity. So if you are going with some heavier gear, Oftentimes people will go with an equatorial, although there are some alt-az options out there that have pretty crazy ability to carry, huge gear.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good explanation of equatorial versus alt-az. Those are the main two types. Then it seems like in recent years we've had a lot of different advances in mounts and mount technologies. One of them, I'm just going to put these out. These aren't ones that I'm really considering, but one of them was pioneered, I think, by Ioptron, and they create something called a center balanced mount, or a center balanced design, and it kind of looks like an EQ mount, but where they've slung the telescope a little bit lower and the counterweight bar rises a little bit higher. And they say that what this design does is that it allows them to have an increased capacity for those mounts. Did you ever look at those, Shane?
No, not really. To be honest, like some of the newer advancements in mounts, unless it's an alt-az, I'm probably not aware of it.
Yeah, I mean, and I wasn't too aware of them either, and kind of started looking at them this week because they kind of caught my attention because like Ioptron makes, for example, I think it's called the CEM26, and it's a 10-pound mount head weight minus counterweights and tripod, but 10-pound mount head weight can carry 26 pounds, which seems like, whoa, that's pretty decent. And then they make all sorts of them. They make one that's like a CEM 40, and it can carry 40 pounds, but that mount head only weighs 18 pounds. So they have large capacity, but small weight. But from what I've been able to gather, and just kind of, and like I said, I didn't know that much about them, but just like in my superficial glance at the market landscape and what people are writing, to me, just like my own personal opinion here, it almost seems like maybe there's still some tweaks that are coming out. Like one of the things that I noticed, which makes me a little bit, I don't know, it just kind of, it's a little bit funny, is the whole marketing feature of having these center balanced design mounts is that they're supposed to have a higher capacity than what a German equatorial mount otherwise would. But they've actually recently released a line of German equatorial mounts that are based on the same components as their CEM mounts. And the adjoining mounts, so you have a CEM 26, then you have a GEM 28, but their German equatorial version of their center balanced mounts all have like about a 10% increase in capacity. So it seems strange that they were marketing the CEMs as having a higher capacity because of this design, but then when they turn it into a German equatorial design, they're saying that they have slightly more capacity. I mean, I actually think probably the capacity is the same, but it is kind of a strange thing. And then I read like different things, like it's a fairly new company, it's a fairly new set of products. So to me, whatever I get, like I want something that's been around like 4 or 5 years, and Ioptron's been around for a while, but I don't think they've had any of their specific designs out for that long. They kind of are still, I think, developing in the development mode. I'm sure they'll get there, but at the current time, I think it's still relatively new products.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Just about like, a tested design that just works and has some history behind it is probably a good thing to add to the list of considerations.
I think as well, like some people are all about having the latest and greatest, and they don't mind. Like I know it's the same thing in the computer world. I work in computers, and some people don't mind getting like the latest and greatest computer and have to work out a few of the little challenge. Like I bought a new computer recently, and as somebody who is in the computer world and doesn't mind tinkering around with them a little bit, I bought something that's a little bit more cutting edge. And, I've had to do a couple little mods and that sort of thing. And to me, I don't mind that. That doesn't bother me at all. But when it comes to a telescope mount, something that's mechanical, like I'm not really mechanically inclined or any sort of engineer type of person. And so to me, whatever I got, it's got to work. Because if I get it and there's a little problem with it, I'm going to have to find somebody who can fix it for me. So, I'll be taking a trip to Shane's.
Yep.
So the other mounts, and one of the ones that really originally caught my eye, and some of our listeners have bought these, and they are good mounts, are these harmonic drive mounts. I think it's ZWO makes them. I think there's a company called Rainbow or something. There's like 3 or 4 or 5 different companies now, and it seems like more and more companies are making these harmonic mounts. Have you seen these ones, Shane?
A little bit, yeah. I am intrigued by these harmonic mounts. They look super interesting. Like, I like the sleekness of them. They look cool. I don't know a lot about performance or other details though.
Yeah, so the harmonic mounts are, like, just to give you an idea, they look, out of all the mounts, they look like a whole different type of mount. They don't look like anything that's been out there so far. Maybe the closest thing might be some of the Altaz mounts, but to me, I don't know if when you were a kid and you're like, 7 or 8, your mom would give you the apple juice can or something. You had to go crush it, and it's kind of hard to crush that can when you're a small child. Because I was a small child when I was like that age. And I would, of course, hit it with my foot, and it would kind of sort of crumple on half of it. And so half of it sort of would still be accordioned out, and the other half would be sort of accordioned in. And that's kind of what these mounts look like. It's sort of like a half crushed, 1.5 liter or 2 liter juice can. Mm-hmm. And they're very small and compact. And I think they're about that size. I've never seen or used one in real life. And apparently they have very high capacity. They can carry a lot of weight for their size. And they're very small and portable, lightweight. And a couple of things that attract me to these mounts are they don't have the counterweight shaft. So you stick them in an observatory, you don't have to worry about bumping in. Mm-hmm. Shaft, don't have to worry about that shaft sticking out. So it's not going to occupy much space. So with a mount like that, maybe you can have a smaller observatory. It's like, oh, this would be great. But then in my research looking at them, because I originally was all about getting one of these new mounts because many of them are coming out. They're getting very good reviews. And one of the challenges I find these days, Shane, I'm sure you've run into this before, and this is a more and more common conversation we're having with listeners, is that a lot of the stuff is being designed specifically for the astro imagers among us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the astrophotography portion of this hobby is extremely popular. There's a lot of folks that want to take, beautiful pictures of the night sky. And as such, the vendors, try to meet their needs. So yeah, There's an awful lot of things designed for them, and that's great, but some of it, can easily be leveraged and be a benefit or value to visual observers, but some of it is kind of overkill for us too. Some of it we don't necessarily need.
And so these harmonic drives are kind of like a bad marriage for some of us visual observers. Maybe they're going to work for other people, but for me anyway, I learned this because I tried it. I did try a mount that I couldn't push to, and I thought, oh, I'll just get used to it or whatever, and I couldn't do it. I had to send it back and get another mount. I just, if I have a mount, I need to be able to point and aim it manually myself, and I don't think I will ever break that. Because like when I'm tired, I was going to say old and tired. I guess maybe that's the problem, getting old and tired. But when I'm tired at night, even though I know that mount can't be pushed to, I'm grabbing the telescope and I'm trying to push that mount to where, and I'm like, oh yeah, I can't do that with this mount. And that's not good for the mount. It's not, it's just not good for the observing experience, not good for the equipment. It's just not a very good experience for me. And these harmonic drives, from what I've been able to ascertain, is they need to do the pointing and the tracking and all this stuff. Like, they're just going to do it. And apparently they do it very well. But you can't manually override that. There's no clutches, at least as far as I know. Now, maybe somebody can write me and tell me the difference, but I did some digging on these and I just couldn't see it. Now, some observers who maybe don't want that feature, if you only want to be able to use power and to have it tracking and to have it go to, or even manually slewing, like some of them you can manually slew just with a hand controller, which is great. And that's like the mount that I had before that I couldn't get used to. It had, the ability to use like a hand paddle to point the telescope. But I just go too much by feel. So I kind of had to eliminate the harmonic drives. If they made one that I could just manually push to and then have it continue tracking, I think I'd be okay. I think it would put it back in the running. But at least for me, Shane, the harmonic mounts and the center balance ones are out. So I've really just been looking at the equatorial and the Altaz mounts. I'm not sure where you are exactly. Are you leaning towards something that's more equatorial, or are you leaning towards something that's more altazimuth, or have you kind of even gotten that far yet?
For me, it would be, right now anyway, it would be Altaz. I just like the simplicity, and not having to worry about the counterweights and all of that kind of stuff. So that's been where my research is at. With a little bit of a new requirement, and I'm not sure how firm I am yet on this, but I'm intrigued by digital setting circles. So not all mounts can have this mounted after the fact, but some can. So I'm looking at also, is that mount compatible to add digital setting circles at some point if I want to? Like I say, I'm not sure that would be a make it or break it requirement for me, but I'm considering it more.
For me, I still am considering EQ mounts for a couple of reasons. One is that my base primary requirement is that I want to be able to mount all of my current scopes on whatever I get. And right now I don't have a mount that I can properly mount everything to. Either I don't want to do it all at once, but I just want to be able to mount everything from my 6-inch 13-pound Maksudov, and I want to be able to mount like my 60 millimeter FS. And to be able to mount and to be able to point them, right? Kind of like what I'm saying. And then also I've got the SkyWatcher AZ8 GTI, and I do really enjoy that mount. It's not a mount that that mount, it's not designed to be set up permanently like in any kind of real outdoor environment. So it's great to set up and then maybe leave out for a night or so. I've even left up for like 2 or 3 nights, but it's not really designed for that. But I have really enjoyed the tracking with it. I don't use the go-to. I've only just used the go-to, just check it out, make, yeah, it works. That's great. But I don't really use it. The only way that I've ever used it is sometimes if it's just really late and I've got like a particular load or the telescope pointed a certain way, sometimes I will get it to like slew across the sky to go from, if I'm looking at maybe a planet in the southwest to a planet that's rising in the northeast, I might get it to go to just because, whatever. But that's sort of the extent. So I don't really need the go-to. So I'm looking at some of these mounts that have, somewhere between like around like a 15-pound to about a 22-pound load capacity, and that weigh in between like around 10 and 20 pounds, because there's many older mounts that are out there that just have manual slow motion, the ability to flip the clutches and point the telescope manually as well. And then there's a lot of mod kits that you can get that allow you to replace some of the parts that maybe have been improved over time versus, maybe what was available in the 80s or 90s or early 2000s. And then as well, like, even for a few $100 American, you can even buy a set of belts, wireless connectivity, digital slow motion. Like you can add all this into a mount that already has like those base sort of fundamental requirements that like a visual observer like us might be into.
Yeah. It's nice to have some flexibility or options like that for sure.
And most of all, like I think I could take something. One of the leading mounts that I've been considering, and I've watched a few sales go through, is like a Great Polaris 2 or a GP2, which is I guess maybe they stopped making it about 12 or 15 years ago or something now. And, it was a mount that came out in like the early 2000s and by Vixen, and they go for not a whole lot of money. Sometimes as low as like $300 Canadian. And they're bare bones, no drives, no nothing. You can get like, usually they come with like a counterweight shaft, maybe like a 3.5 or 4 kilogram weight. And then what you can do with those, and they have very good internal components, but there's no go-to. It's just a mount. But then what I was thinking is I could get one of these modification packages and add in the motor drives, add in the wireless connectivity, add in the digital slow motion. It's probably not going to use the wireless connectivity as much or whatever, but you buy it comes all as one package, and it's not that expensive. So maybe for like $700 to $800, I could have a pretty decent mount, that would meet my minimum requirements. One of the other paths that I've been going down is looking at like the SkyWatcher EQ5, which weighs about 12 pounds, can hold up to 25 pounds. And it's a SkyWatcher mount. I have a SkyWatcher mount in my SkyWatcher mount that I currently have. you and I, and we talked about this in the podcast. I had some small problem with it. It worked, but it just wasn't working as designed. It had like this click to it, and some people could live with it, I couldn't. And apparently, like, some people would just take it apart and clean the burrs out. We tried that, but there was a problem with the screw, so we couldn't do it. So I ended up sending it back to SkyWatcher. They were great to deal with. They did the work. It was free, and they were awesome. I just want to say I did have a problem with SkyWatcher mount. They fixed it, and it's perfect. And SkyWatcher was great to deal with. So I'm not trashing anybody here. I just want to put that out there. So I would buy another SkyWatcher mount for sure. I would buy it new. But if I was doing it again, if I was doing it this way, what I would do right off the hop is, if I got an EQ5 Deluxe, because it can hold close to 25 pounds, nice bumping capacity for what I have, and they're relatively inexpensive, I would buy it in a country or somewhere, because I don't think this is available here in Canada, and I would send it to an aftermarket company to actually do any deburring and replace some of those gears right at the start, without even taking them out, even though probably there's like a 70% or an 80% chance that I'm not going to have that problem again. I would just circumvent going through that cycle of getting them out and then having a challenge with it, and then whatever. And I would have some other small modifications made to it at that time. Typically a mount doesn't come greased for -30. I would have that done. I would have, a few other little modifications done to it. And then I would get one of those kits and put it on. So then I'd have a higher capacity equatorial mount. Pros to all this would be to have planetary tracking for my sketching. And there's lots of online after sales support. And the cons to these, of course, is that you get a little bit of a load increase, but it doesn't really give me that much room. Like, Shane, you're talking about maybe getting a 6-inch refractor.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to get, like, I was looking at the mounts that are equatorial to take a 6-inch refractor. And I mean, you take it away. I mean, you would need a pretty darn big equatorial mount that I think is beyond my affordability to probably get in here.
Yeah, you would need a pretty substantial one. The ones that intrigue me, well, and again, I really haven't looked at the EQs, but there's the Rowan AZ75. I think there's also an AZ100 maybe, but that one is likely, way beyond the spec that I need.
Yeah.
APM makes some pretty high capacity alt-az mounts. I think it's like the max load, they call it.
Yeah.
So there's a couple big ones out there that are intriguing to me, but this is something too for me. Like, I think you're much closer to this purchase than I am. This is more a little more future for me, so I'm not as invested in the research at this time.
Said the guy with around 10 mounts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, just pointing that. Anyway, I'm not. So. Yeah, So here's, I got some questions for you, because I've made a list of the alt-az mounts that I'm looking at. I'm not going to talk about the max load from APM. I think that's an awesome mount, but boy, oh boy, to get that configured and sent here would be like $2,000. That's way beyond my budget for this. So just so people know, the one mount that is on my list, this is kind of like, in a way, like the number one mount. It's a mount that you own, which is, it comes out in a few different varieties, but sometimes it's called the SkyT Mount. And it's that white mount. You own it, Shane. I've actually seen that mount in the field. I've used it a little bit. I think that's a great mount. And when I look online, not only have I seen and used this mount, I think it's a nice mount. You own it. And it looks like people are putting all kinds of telescopes on it. I've seen people even put 10-inch Newtonians up to f5.3, which is a decent sized telescope. I even saw somebody who put an 8-inch f6 refractor acromount on this. Now, they're not using these at high power, but people are doing this with that mount. I'm just curious, like, would you consider just even using that? Like, you already have a mount that probably could handle a 6-inch refractor. What do you think of that mount? Should I just like cut my losses and get this mount? Because it's a decently priced mount. I can get it here for $500, put a few mods on, and not real expensive. Seems like a great mount. What are your thoughts on this mount? And maybe that's the mount I should get.
Yeah, it's a great mount. I have nothing but positive things to say about it. one of the things also that I really, really like about it is how flexible or adaptable it is to your observing conditions. And what I mean by that is the ability to add counterweights, but add them in really unique configurations. So while it's a T mount, both sides are unique of the mount. And most T mounts, you have the exact same right side and it matches the left side, in terms of design and capacity. Not the case with the SkyT. There's one side that is designed for your heavier mount, whatever that would be. And then the other side much lighter. And then that other side can have a counterbalance shaft and weight that just goes straight out, kind of the end of the T mount, or it can mount like at a perpendicular angle to the mount. And that side also has its own axis. So you can rotate where that weight actually kind of is in relation to your telescope. And you can almost use it as like a counterbalance to like heavy eyepieces is how I've used it. So it's a super flexible mount. It definitely is my highest capacity mount. Like when I had my 120 ED SkyWatcher, which is like an f7.5, I think it's a pretty big telescope. Like it has a long tube, so pretty big moment arm, and I think it weighed probably all kitted out somewhere in that 12 to 15 pound range. And the SkyT handled it quite well. Now, would I put a 6-inch on there? I probably would try it. Before I made a big investment in a heavier or a higher capacity mount. I'm not 100% confident though on the result. I think I would be a little disappointed, particularly at anything that isn't a low power. I'm sure it would be okay with the 41 millimeter panoptic, doing some real wide field views, but I'd be concerned of anything more powerful that it might be a little vibration-y. And the other thing maybe to say here, Chris, is, vibrations and dampening times, that's an extremely subjective thing for all observers. Some people don't mind it or can deal with it. I'm not one of them. Like if there's any kind of vibration, it really drives me nuts, especially when I'm trying to focus an eyepiece. It just drives me crazy. So I would try it, but I'm not sure if it could handle a 6-inch.
Yeah, I do like that option because I think with my current gear, it ticks all the boxes except for maybe the option of having some electronic tracking. And I think it's like it would be my cheapest option. I think I could get the mount. I think I could get you have to buy saddles for them. I think I could get those. And I think I could be ready to rock and roll for like around $700. So I think it would meet sort of most of my requirements and and it would be well within my budget. Yeah.
And I guess my recommendation too would be, I think you'd only really need one saddle, just because like you'd want a nicer saddle on the side that you're putting your heavy telescope. The other side, because it can't handle a lot of weight, I think the saddle that comes with it is probably sufficient. But if you are putting, anything, sizable on that side, a better saddle would be needed.
Yeah.
And I guess really too, Chris, if you wanted, like, when things warm up and we actually start doing some regular observing, just take this SkyT mount that I have for a month or something like that, use it and see what you think.
Yeah. I would really appreciate that. And I think I'll take you up on that because that mount is, in all seriousness, is very high. It's a mount. It's made by, I don't know who it's made by exactly, but I know it's sold by SkyWatcher primarily. I think sometimes it's called the AZ5, but there's a couple AZ5s I think now, so be careful. And then it's also sold as the SkyT, and then Telescope Service has one, but that kind of gives you the lens. You can get it with or without tripod. I think if you buy it with the tripod, I think I could buy it with the tripod and have it here for under $600, and then buy a mounting plate of some sort. But it's well within the budget. I like that. I think it's a neat mount.
Right. Let's see.
Do you ever take a look at the AOK Swiss AYO2? They make a Digi, they make a Master. They weigh between like 10 and 16 pounds. They can hold between 8 and I think it's like 16 kilograms on a side. Do you ever look at those mounts?
Yeah, I did. Is it AOK Swiss or the gyro or gyro or however you pronounce that? One of those companies made a T mount that William Optics rebadged many years ago.
That's the AYO. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had that mount basically a long time ago, a T mount, and I really didn't like it. Actually, it was super. Again, the vibration was just it was not good for me, and I don't know if it was the tripod, because it comes on a Surveyor's tripod, that William Optic one. But it's as basic as it gets, right? It's a T mount with your friction controls for both axes, and that's it. So pretty simple.
No slow motion. And the way that AYO sells it, they make and I think you're right. I think the weak spot in the William Optics version was that Surveyor tripod. I always thought it seemed kind of strange. Like it seemed like it had a lot of flex in it, to me anyway. And and you are more sensitive, I think, than I am to vibration, though I certainly don't like vibration either. So they make some pretty heavy duty recommendations for the tripod. And as well, this is like a newer version, the AYO2, and they make a Digi and a Master. And with the AYO2 or the Digi, the pricing on them isn't too bad, but you can end up spending as much as $2,000 on one of these. But they do come in really cool colors.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
So some to think about. But I think in order to get one that kind of met my requirements would be a fair bit. So kind of moving on, one of the other mounts that I'm looking at, and this is the one in a way that's kind of leading the pack for my thoughts for a few reasons, is that the Lazmany AZ or AZ8. It's got a 13-pound head, but it can carry 35 pounds. Did you ever look at this Lazmany Alta-Zenith mount, Shane?
Yes, and you've opened up a wound, Chris. This brings back memories that I'm still scarred. So
I'm sorry.
No, I know. When this mount came out, I was in the market for like a pretty robust AZ mount, because I just purchased my SkyWatcher 120 ED. I was unhappy with that William Optic mount, so it was, what's next? What should I get? So the Lazmany AZ8 was pretty fresh at that point, as was the Explore Scientific Twilight 2 mount. And I opted for the Twilight 2 because at that time they were close in price, but I think the Explore Scientific was a couple $100 less, or $200 or $300 less. And reports were that it was pretty good performance. And anyway, I totally regret not buying the AZ8. It's a beautiful looking mount, number one. It has outstanding specs. But ever since I got that Lazmany GM9, I didn't realize just the quality of a Lazmany mount, how well it's machined, how tight the tolerances are. It is of the highest quality build, and I assume that the AZ8 would be no exception. It has slow motion controls. It's everything I would want in a mount. And my probably one of the reasons why I don't own it is they just stopped producing it. And another sign, I think, that it's an outstanding mount. Try to find one used. You won't, because nobody sells them. They're just because I think they work so darn well that nobody is willing to part with it.
So this one, again, I think maybe you and I even talked about this back then. I was thinking, did we podcast on this? But I think this is back in our in-person beer days. And I had caught that mount as well. Now, for me at the time when I was just grabbing going it, I was like, this is just a little too heavy to be, hopping around and, trying to go and pull it out of the car and set it up every night. I was like, this is just a little too heavy for me for that, knowing like how I like to observe. But now with a more permanent setup, and like you said, with the quality of a Lazmany, I don't think I'd have any reservations about putting a Lazmany out on my deck, throwing a cover over it, putting a rope around it, tying it to my railing, and leaving it there. As long as I was like physically present on the property, I would probably just leave it there. If I was off for a week, I would just leave it set up all week. I would let it hail and rain. I don't think it'd have any problem under my Telegizmos 365 mount or cover on that mount.
Yeah. I think it would be an amazing mount. In fact, if any listeners have that mount and use it, I would love to hear about it. And I notice you have a note here that it might be re-released, or a new a new design potentially here in 2023?
So I'll get to that just in 1 second. I want to
Sure.
cut you off because I want to say a couple things about it first. The things that catch my eye with this mount is it comes with the Lazmany saddle plates for both Vixen and Lazmany plates, and that to me, that's a big deal because buying those plates on their own can be expensive. It has some options, but when you can buy it as a package or just as a standalone head. And I could buy that head. I could just buy that head, and that would be all I need. And I don't have to mess around with buying too many options. They sell it. It's complete. Comes with slow motion controls and setting circles. Now, the strange part, we're going to get into this with the next mount. The strange part is with the next mount, the two complaints about the next mount are that it doesn't have slow motion controls and setting circles, which the Lazmany does. But people complain about the Lazmany setting circles and the slow motion controls. So one, slow motion controls are only on one side. You simply saw this. Typically, you're going to be looking at objects in the ecliptic when you're using your slow motion controls for planets, right? If you're just doing deep sky, you might be able to get away without using your slow motion controls as much. And so what you can do is simply orient it so that it's pointed towards the ecliptic, so that, however your setup is, you make sure that the azimuth slow motion controls are pointed in a way that's going to allow you to easily access them where the planets are going to be most observed. And then I saw people who modified it, put like an extension around. And then considering many other mounts that are high-end and high quality in the same price range don't even have slow motion controls, I think it's good. The other thing is people complain that there's a small amount of backlash. And so there's been video made on how to adjust that and blah, blah, blah. And then there's some complaints about like the visibility of the setting circles just in the way that they're mounted on there. But it does have them, unlike virtually all of the others. So they have put a couple things on this. And I think it just goes to show how difficult it is to implement everything on an Altaz mount and keep the price within reason, that the people like Shane and I might actually be able to buy and still be able to afford telescopes or maybe build an observatory, stuff like that. So I think Lazmany has done it. There's a long wait time. And currently, just sort of digging around in the back recesses of the internet, seems like availability possibly in June of this year. So I put my name on the wait list.
I might do the same then too. A comment too about the setting circles. One of the reasons why I wanted a Lazmany GM, I was looking for a GM8 at the time. Actually, the biggest reason why I picked the Lazmany mount was the setting circles. At that time, I had a backyard observatory, and I had a Celestron AVX mount in there because I'm in the city. It's hard to find guide stars, and it's more challenging to find objects, in a part of the sky where there's no visible stars. But my observatory was it had high humidity all the time in it, so it really wasn't good for electronics. So I thought the next best thing would be just old school setting circles. However, most mounts nowadays really don't have setting circles, and if they do, they're insufficient. The size or the scale of the numbers, or the numbers is too small to be of any use. However, the Lazmany mounts actually have really good setting circles on them, or at least the GM, like the EQ mounts do. And that was a big feature for me. And I've used them, and they're great. They work exceptionally well. Once you calibrate them for your night's observing session, they're fantastic.
Go to the next mount, which is the new or newish Rowan AZ75. Weighs 8 pounds out of the box. We got to put saddles on there. Can carry up to 33 pounds. Shane, this is one that you mentioned earlier on. What have you been thinking about this mount?
It just has a lot of really strong reviews in terms of some of the qualities I've already mentioned with the Lazmany mounts. The machining, the tolerances, the quality of the mounts made by Rowan seem to be very, very high. They also have a large or a high carrying capacity, and they're adaptable with digital setting circles. So they tick a lot of boxes for me. Now, they certainly are not inexpensive mounts, and Maybe a plus or a minus is like you really just buy a base mount from them. And if you want like saddles or other features, it's, add on. So the price can increase pretty quickly with the Rowan mounts, but there's a lot of positive reviews on them, and they seem like a really solid choice.
A couple of things that catch my attention with this mount is, although you need saddles, like you may not need a saddle, or I may not need a saddle, because the Takahashi clamshells can bolt directly to the mount without a saddle. Mm-hmm. So if you happen to own one of those, or like I know Mike has one of those saddles, I've bought it from him from time to time. I could just simply get that saddle on if he needs it or not. And if I bought this mount, then I could, without buying anything else, I could mount my TAC 100 to it right off the hop. Might even be able to mount the other TAC that I have to it as well. Because I think the bolts are the same on my clamshell for my 60. So I can already start mounting telescopes to this without buying anything else. And I've seen people doing this online. So they bought just the head. They're good to go. One thing I love about this mount that I don't think any other mount has in this LTAS zone, and they should, this seems like it should be 100% requirement, is a declination stop. They've actually put just, and it looks a little rough, but I'll go with it because it stops the telescope from nosediving. It can only go just above horizontal. I think like to like half a degree or something above the true horizon. And that's perfect. That's all you'd ever want to go to anyway. So you can't use this for terrestrial viewing. At least, I don't know, maybe you can flip it around or something if you want, but I never use my telescopes for terrestrial viewing. I'm going to use them to look at the sky. So I like this because a couple times I've, especially late at night, I haven't quite engaged the clutch, or I haven't engaged the clutch and the telescope goes nose diving and I got to catch it, or you can get bopped in the chin or whatever. It's just one of the downsides to using an alt-azimuth. But they've thought of this, and it's well done. And yeah, a little bit of a challenge there with getting it on a mount, though. I think I'm not sure how that would work.
Yeah, for sure.
So got a couple more mounts just want to skip through that I've been looking at. The nose NOHS mount, it's called the CT20, relatively inexpensive, made in Korea. Bill Palomini did a really nice Cloud NH review about a year ago. It's only 2 kilograms, but can hold 20 kilograms. Quick thoughts on that one, Shane?
Yeah, I remember reading about this mount and being intrigued, but I really don't know much about it other than the Bill Paoloni review on Cloudy Nights. Super intriguing that it's such a lightweight mount, but has such capacity. I guess just, visual thoughts are, part of the advantage here of this mount. It's a T mount, but it doesn't have long arms on either side, which probably lends to the stability. Yeah. Very intriguing mount.
Gyro Urkel, I think is what it's called. Needs saddles, counterweight bar, reasonably affordable, around $700. I think the nose mount is around $700 too. These are all about the same cost. And this Gyro Urkel says it can do 10 to 18 kilograms inside, depending on the counterweights you put on there. And out of the box, it fits on a CG5 or similar tripods, like that feature. Did you ever look at that mount?
Yeah, I did look at the Gyro, whatever we're saying. Again, they look like very intriguing mounts. They've been around a long, long time as a company. So I think, whatever they're doing is working.
Yeah.
But again, I haven't dug too deep into those mounts.
Really interested. This is like sort of the interesting option. Not going to go with this one, but this is a very, very interesting mount. It's a very new mount, but it's by Vixen, who's been making mounts for a long time. They know what they're doing. It's called the APZ/EQ. Did you ever see this mount?
I have. Yeah, it's very interesting. It's something like this is usually right up my alley of being highly adaptable. But again, similar to these other two mounts we just talked about, I really haven't done a lot of research on it. I am aware of it though.
This mount by Vixen can work, strangely enough, designed to work as both an AZ mount, and you can actually MacGyver it just with a hex wrench almost in the field, I guess, to be a fully tracking EQ mount. In AZ mode, it holds up to 6 kilograms. In what they call like EQ mode, It can hold up to 6 kilograms, and you can even put tracking motors on. The tracking motors just slide off and on. Really slick. The internals stay internal. There's no external wiring or anything. So you can flip it if you want. So say you have part of the year where you're just doing deep sky, you want to mount that telescope up in AZ mode. And this is a mount that does appeal to me in a way, except for the cost. We'll get to that in a sec, because I could just have it in AZ mode for when the planets aren't in the sky and I'm not really using as much high power. And then once the planets come around, just take it apart on my kitchen table and flip it over into that EQ mode. And it also only weighs like around 3 or 3.25 kilograms. It's a very light mount, and that's fairly decent holding capacity. The downside is that originally the cost was reasonable. I think originally it was like $500 or $600. Now to get it, you'd be looking at, hard to say. It's hard to say what your options are and how much they are, but there's some expensive stuff with this mount, and it's going to run you probably around $1,500 Canadian to really get into this. So, probably at least $1,200 or $1,300 American just to start getting into this kind of setup. But that's a very interesting mount, I think.
Yeah, it is. It, I guess though, I kind of wonder, is it, while you have the adaptability to go AZ or EQ, I wonder if you just leave it in one mode and that's that. And if that's the case, why don't you just get that kind of mount? I don't know how much I would kind of go back and forth, but who knows? I guess. Or
two mounts, because you could buy, I've listed lots of mounts here that are like $700 that would have the same qualities. So you get two $700 mounts for what this mount is going to do. That's going to cost you at least $1,400. So I don't know. And who knows? Like it just seems risky to be taking a mount apart, once or twice a year even, and then putting it back together again. I feel like that can't go well over the long term. But VIXA makes quality products, and I know people own this mount. Maybe somebody out there can enlighten us. Shane, anything else to add to this episode?
No, the world of mounts is fun. There's a lot of choices out there, and they all have like little nuances. So even though some of these may appear very similar, when you kind of peel the onion, you'll find that there's a lot of different considerations to be aware of. So, I think especially with some of the cost of these, it's important to make sure you know what you're looking for, and then do a little research to ensure you're getting the right features.
Right. Well, thanks, Shane. Thanks everybody for listening. And if our listeners enjoyed the podcast and you haven't already, we would sure appreciate it. Leave us a 5-star review in your podcatching software. Say something fun, positive, and you'll help other people find actual astronomy in 2023. Send your observing reports, questions, and your experiences with mounts to us at actualastronomy@gmail.com.
Thank you everyone for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. If you are interested in more information, would like to contact us, or if you would like to support the podcast, check out our website, actualastronomy.com.